won't go into huge detail about Rojava. I mean, people can read in the pamphlet and elsewhere, but it is one of the important factors. I'm going to try and start from the broader context and skate around, try and give an overall picture of what I think is happening. Obviously, you can't go into minute detail in 10 or 15 minutes, but anyway, this is what I think about it. And once again, apologies for not being here at the beginning. So I haven't seen any sign of worry from the British state, really, about what's going on with their one of their top allies. But maybe people saw yesterday that John Kerry has put Turkey on notice about its membership of NATO, which is kind of huge stuff, even if it's only rhetoric, and it probably is a bit more than rhetoric, in terms of the need for observation of democratic rules, which are obviously out the window if you've got a state-controlled news agency putting out footage, which I don't know if people have seen, of beaten up top generals under arrest. And if they're doing that with top generals, what are they doing to other people? And the EU similarly has showed disquiet. Obviously people are trying to see what's behind the coup. I'm sure Phil has said there was some sort of a coup which was evidently quite weak. I mean, I saw Erdogan on Saturday and he looked quite nervous to me. I mean, my guess is that they probably knew something was going on and let it run a bit. He's a bit of a gambler. I'm not sure what the poker terms are, but I think he probably thought the best way of facing it down was to let it run a bit and dive in. That is my guess. I mean, maybe we'll gather in due time. I mean, people should remember that he's been building his base for many years. Was it about 7 or 8 years ago, there were large-scale trials which were partly about trying to purge part of the army that was not in alignment with AKP thinking. If you're doing stuff like that, and Turkey is a country where the state is full of factions and intelligence officers anyway, you would expect by now that the AKP would have quite an apparatus for knowing what other people are doing. Obviously people have raised, you know, why didn't they know this coup was happening? Well, you know, maybe they did. I'm not going to spend more time on that, but my guess is probably that's what happened. Maybe there was some violinists involved, maybe some chemalists. Also, people have observed the fact that some of the Air Force and other people running the war in Kurdistan, amongst those arrested, top Air Force General, I think, has denied that he was involved in the coup. So maybe there is a factor to do with disagreement over the policy of the running the war in Kurdistan, that it's an unsustainable policy, and of course it's been covered up, but the Turkish army has taken quite heavy losses over the past year, which are probably unsustainable in terms of maintaining social calm, and mind anything else. What made this coup and counter-coup? I mean, I would argue Erdogan is running a counter-coup. You could say it's new, or you could say it's a continuation of a rolling coup, or series of coups that you could say has been going on since the Ergenekon business, a sort of periodic purging and then lapsing into normal scale repression, plus of course more recently the war being restarted. So what makes this situation possible of a coup and counter-coup? Well, I would say broadly 4 things allowed this to happen. The very weak position of the working class in Turkey. I mean, in my view, the workers' movement has never been able to recover from the coup in 1980, essentially. You know, yes, there have been some struggles, but there's never been a real recovery. And of course, sections have been bought off by the AKP. Second, a determination to solve the Kurdish issue militarily and a refusal to negotiate in good faith. So, you know, this has been a huge thing for years, and as Phil said, it's a huge thing now. I don't think they can solve it militarily. Of course, they can kill a lot of people, but that's not the same thing. Anyway, this deepens the crisis of the Turkish state, which leads on to the third factor, again, something that's been going on for some years, some sort of splitting and disintegration in the Turkish state. I mean, that is again shown by the fact that there was this rather weak coup and people can't even make up their minds who was involved in it. You know, if I were an international relations person, I might well be saying, is Turkey a failed state, or will it be soon? And you've got a big army. It's one of the linchpins, supposedly, of NATO. It's been a key part of certainly US foreign policy in the Middle East as a whole. So this is an enormous question, including, of course, its role in Syria. Fourthly, the fourth factor that has led to this situation, again, I hope Phil touching on it, the implosion, if you like, of the key axes, or some of the key axes of Erdogan's project. The neoliberal and middlingly liberal Islamic regime around the economy and social life. Well, the economy must be tanking. You know, tourism. I don't know if people seen. Did you mention this this morning? Was it 12 or 15,000 education sector employees have been dismissed, suspended? This is on top of 7,000 or 8,000 people in the judiciary. So it's going to be chaos throughout society, I would think. And on top of the bombings and the war, obviously tourism is one of the main things, is sort of not going to be doing well. So these purges and so on must have a knock-on effect on everything, including the economy. In the 90s, the IMF happily provided what I called a very generous drip feed to the Turkish economy while it was sort of being restabilised and the rich people were getting richer. Will they be willing to do that again? Who knows? And then next point, a failure to be able to carry out the state or AKP's project of overthrowing Assad and defeating the Syrian Kurds. And that was partly to do with, I would say, the hesitance. Obviously there was resistance to Assad in Syria, but the Americans seem to have hesitated, maybe changed their mind. You know, they didn't go for broke in supporting Turkey and its allies. So now the Syrian situation is at an impasse, but Erdogan has not been successful. People may have seen he's been making a bid to negotiate with Assad, got an agreement, mainly I think over oil and gas, but it's also political with Israel, trying to mend fences with Russia. I mean, that's a bit of a sign of desperation, I think. But anyway, his Syria policy, his gamble on getting rid of Assad quickly didn't work. Okay, well, I'll try. And lastly, continuing need to purge elements in the state that don't support him. So I'm going to move on to what are the elements of the resistance. Well, obviously there is the working class in Turkey, there is the sort of opposition who support democracy, freedom of expression. You know, people are tough, but there's not very many of them. I mean, maybe this huge thing of sacking, presumably to be followed by trials and arrest of huge numbers of public sector workers, perhaps that will detonate something, I don't know. Otherwise, maybe it will be quite a while before much can happen. And then the other main element, of course, of the resistance is from the Kurdish movement, the guerrillas and the Kurdish movement more broadly, and the HDP, whose scope for manoeuvre is being very much cut down. Some people were arrested today and yesterday, and what's going on in Rojava, which is under threat. I don't know how much the position will change with this counter-coup by Erdogan, but at the moment the YPG fighters are still trying to get ISIS out of this town called Manbij as part of shutting the ISIS route down into Iraq, through Syria into Iraq, with US support. But the Kurdish areas are being shelled and harassed from Turkey, and I should say there seems to be no sign that the Turkish army and air force, even if it's being destabilised, is letting up an Kurdish operation in Kurdistan. It doesn't seem to be. The war is still pursuing. Can I have another couple of minutes? I'm getting there. The Kurdish movement is still trying to maintain its course. I mean, there's stuff in the book about how they're trying to encourage self-organisation. As we speak, there's a quite broad conference going on in Sulaymaniyah in South Kurdistan, mainly with people from the Middle East, not just Kurdish people, with the title Peace and Stability, presumably how do we get there? So, you know, they're constantly trying to get more people involved in looking for a way forward for the Middle East. The present system can't provide it. It can only provide massacre and repression. So, I mean, there isn't time to go into massive detail, but I agree with what Phil said, that there are elements of fascism or fascistic organisation of repression going on. I mean, it's got historical precedence within Turkey, of course. I don't know how much people saw, but a lot of the people on the streets were AKP supporters. There was a lot of violence, including against conscripts who probably had nothing to do with anything. I mean, maybe some of them supported the coup, but I think probably many of them were just sent there. Quite savage violence. And, you know, the symbolic thing, and I think materially one of the strong things, is this polarisation between struggles by oppressed people, especially women, as against mobilisations and encouragement, mobilisations around misogyny and encouragement of misogyny from the AKP. And, you know, you can see this in the practice of ISIS, you can see it in the behaviour of the gangs. I mean, I saw a tiny video this morning which is kind of, again, emblematic. It was some blokes, some of them look like police, some of them look like religiously dressed figures, and somebody had been making comments on how women should be dressed, and some women in the street were just screaming at them, and these people, I don't know who the women were, they were just normally attired, no veil, jeans and jackets. They were screaming at these guys who thought better of it, got into their van and sheared off. I mean, that's not what always happens, but that sort of encounter is emblematic of what's going on, and, you know, one of the central issues that is going to be fought over. Just one more thing, again coming back to the broad context and not directly inside Turkey, as well as the complete instability of the whole situation in Syria, whether you're talking about Rojava or the rest of Syria, where, as we know, there's an unsolved war, kind of stymied resolution, Assad doing not too badly. That can't go on forever, don't know where it's going. As well as that, the situation in Iraq is unstable. I mean, there's essentially a sort of condominium, I think, between the Americans and the Iranians over most of Iraq. The Americans try to run, and all the other interfering powers, try to control South Kurdistan, but socially the situation is explosive. Ordinary people are, you know, still have a lot of trouble. There's still a war against ISIS. Barzani has the upper hand within the government because of the weaknesses of the other party, but the situation isn't stable. I'm always seeing American and EU ambassadors, you know, they spend half their time in the front rooms of the Kurdish party leaders because they know they've got to try and keep the lid on another bit of the situation. so that is not, it's not stable. And of course, one of the things that's common to these whole areas is how's the Kurdish liberation movement going to move forward. Now, I'm not even sure that the coup, as opposed to the counter-coup, I'm just about to wind up, is totally over. I think there has been a certain amount of fighting going on that we're not seeing much of in the press. And of course, if you see massive fists coming down on much of the army, that might be an incentive to see how things are going and maybe come back either now or later. And we also don't know what the AKP are planning next in terms of their external intervention. I will just say that it is noteworthy that both before the Brussels attack and the recent attack in Nice, there were actually threats, what I would interpret as threats coming from Erdogan and his Prime Minister Yildirim. You know, attacks can happen anywhere. Personally, I don't think that is, you know, mere rhetoric. I think there are links, maybe not in every case, but people know about the traffic up and down through Syria and Turkey by people connected with ISIS. So we don't know where this counter-coup is going. I mean, was I staggered? I don't know. Anyway, huge number of civil servants suspended this morning. Where's it going? Where's it going next? We don't know. I think we're sort of a bit out at sea without a compass, and I think you know, there's a huge need for solidarity. It's a huge task, but there's quite a lot we can do, and we shouldn't forget that, as I said at the beginning, as far as we know, people who run this place are very close to the Turkish state, so that is a factor to take into account. They may well be fine with trying to keep a lid on the whole thing, which is probably not possible. So there's a lot of work for us in terms of trying to do solidarity with the working class movement in Turkey and with the Kurdish movement and with the academics who are under increased threat.
Great, thank you very much.